Welcome to GovCast, connecting with federal IT's top decision makers. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research. With me today is managing editor Ross John Fortune. Hi, Ross.
Hello.
You had the chance to chat with Melvin Brown, Deputy Chief Information Officer at OPM. How'd it go?
It went great. I think, Melvin is a really interesting guy, and OPM obviously has a lot of different applications and works with all the different agencies. So it's a really interesting way to look at any of the issues that obviously that we cover and that we talk about on GovCast and generally that come up in government when it comes to the IT space, and the Office of CIO, obviously at OPM, is a big part of that.
So for those of us who don't know what OPM is or what it stands for, what is OPM?
Oh, so OPM is the Office of Personnel Management. It is sort of loosely defined as the government's HR shop. They call it human capital, human resources, same kind of thing. The Office of CIO, is fairly specific when it comes to that because every agency has its own Office of Technology, whether that's, the CIO's office usually. So he has about a 200-person workforce or so that's specifically for OPM. But, the thing to remember is that OPM, because it is the HR shop for the government, they have all this data, like tons and tons of data, whether that's federal employee viewpoint survey, like a lot of retirement, they process retirement for federal employees, all those things. So the Office of CIOs is fairly important within that context.
Gotcha. What did you all talk about? What were some of the highlights from your conversation?
Well, so I mentioned the retirement processing aspect of it. One of the things that sort of is connected with that or is related to that is the aging workforce in the IT space in government, because that is kind of a concern, and certainly it's a concern for him. He talked about how the OCIO has a fairly high average age. I think the last measurement had it at over 50 years old. So the Office of the CIO at OPM really needs to get younger. And so Brown's goal is to really do that, one of his goals. So he talked to us about trying to build a pipeline of talent to get people in earlier and to keep them around. So not just recruiting, but also retention. But that also includes the regular problems that people have with hiring, which is trying to get as big a pool to get the best candidates. Hybrid has helped with that, he talked about, because it does open up the hiring pool to anybody with network access. But he also talked about the Pathways program at OCIO, which brings in interns, and some of them have gotten hired full time at OPM. It's that kind of thing that seems fairly intuitive, but in my time in covering government, that has not been the case. So it's a priority for Brown, and I think it's, as far as he sort of told us, it's borne fruit.
Those internship programs just seem like such a natural fit for growing just awareness and interest in all of these federal agencies. I mean, I know that in an office like OPM, I didn't know what it stood for. I didn't know what it did. And I spent every week talking about the federal government. So along with just, how difficult it can be to just get through the application process, I think also raising awareness of all the different opportunities available in the federal government, all the different agencies you can work for, all the different offices is really important, just so that people know how they can fit into that system.
It's really hard because the hiring system is difficult. And I think that's one thing that people who've worked with it know. And OPM has some input into that. Obviously, the Office of the CIO isn't really involved as much, but getting a foot in the door is a big deal. And the Pathways program is a really good way to start that.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me a little bit more about Melvin Brown. What led him to OPM? What were some prior experiences?
Brown has a fairly interesting and long career in government. He started out the service. He's a veteran of the Marine Corps, but he's also worked at a few different agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, Small Business Administration. He's been at the Office of the CIO for a few years now. And he's really done a lot of work in, the technology space in the public sector. And it's sort of interesting that his perspective comes from all those years of working at those agencies. He talked a lot about particularly managing the staff and how much feedback works with the staff and how much that guides what he does. I think particularly when it comes to bringing forward technology and projects, he does rely a lot on getting these conversations going, which is a fairly interesting way to do things, only in so much as it's probably very effective. He asks things like, how does it work? How does it solve the problem? And he used this analogy about building an empty house, essentially, that bringing forward technology that doesn't help much is like building a house that no one wants to live in. So his office's goal is to build a house that people want to live in and thus make the community that people want to be a part of.
Well, speaking of keeping the conversation going, let's not keep our listeners waiting any longer. Let's dive into your interview.
Melvin Brown II is the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Office of Personnel Management. In his role as CIO, he oversees an IT portfolio of more than $100 million in programs and a growing workforce of hundreds of employees. Prior to his work at OPM, he had positions at the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Small Business Administration. Welcome to GovCast.
Thanks, Ross.
So the OPM fiscal 23 to 26 data strategy that was released earlier this year, it's fairly comprehensive, but what role do you see the CIO's office in it, and how are you sort of working with the data strategy?
So that's a great question. And so our Ted Kalk, our CDO, has been a great partner. And the thing that we've decided to do is that, treating it almost like a plumber and water company relationship, whereas the CIO is, we're responsible for the pipes and the plumbing, and Ted's responsible for the water, which is the actual data. And that's kind of the relationship we forge, is that we'll take care of the technology and all the underpinnings, and Ted will take care of the data side of making sure that the data and the data quality and that data is used in the right way.
Well, to that end, OPM has relationships with every agency in the federal government as well. So that interoperability is something that we talk a lot about here. How is OPM learning from other agencies as far as it crafts all of its IT strategy and similarly its data strategies?
From a data perspective, one of the things that, the data strategy did do was highlight the wealth of data that OPM has and how sharing that data across the enterprise, specifically, as the HR agency for the entire federal government, we've got HR data that once it's consolidated can bring extreme value to agencies, just from our hiring, from our attrition, from our demographics. All of that enterprise level data helps agencies look at it from not just their own perspective, but from a government-wide perspective, so that we can come up with a consolidated HR and hiring strategy for the federal workforce. I mean, if you look at the latest demographics, it talks about our aging workforce and what does our early career talent look like from an enterprise perspective, which led the agencies to start looking at intern programs so that we can start to identify or bring in more early career talent. That would not have been made possible had it not been for the ability to have visibility across the entire federal government on our workforce and that demographic.
You set me up perfectly for a more OPM specific question. OPM is the human capital agency for the federal government. I know I was doing some research for today that you've spoken publicly about some of the challenges that OPM is facing with regards to its aging IT workforce. So how are you tackling that? And what do those challenges look like?
So we got a couple of challenges. I mean, we're trying to modernize with yesterday's skills. No fault of anybody's own, but we're trying to modernize with legacy skills. So we've got to upskill the current workforce, but then we got to bring down the age gap of early career talent to bring in new and fresh ideas. And so about a couple of years ago, we kicked off within OPM our intern program. And so within the CIO shop, I brought on 18 new interns across the federal government, leveraging the hybrid and remote work capabilities that we have. And today it has led us to, it has been very fruitful. Let me say it that way. We've been able to hire 16 of those 18 6 of those 18 rather have come on board to be federal employees full time, and we're continuing that pipeline. So the last year we brought on another 6 to bring our total back up to the 18, and so we want to continue that as a culture, that we continue to have interns coming in every summer and onboarding interns every summer, so that we can continue to get access to early career talent for them to bring the skills necessary for us to evolve and deliver on tomorrow's workforce and tomorrow's problems today.
I've talked about this with other people in similar positions. How has remote work helped, hurt? How has that worked with the workforce acquisition and recruiting and training and those kinds of things?
It's been a phenomenal tool for us from a recruitment perspective. It's given us access to not just talent in the DC area, but we've been able to access talent all across the United States. Of my 18 interns, I think only 3 are here in the DC area. I've got some in California. I've got some in the Midwest. I've got some in Texas. And so it's a plethora of diverse talent all across the U.S. that we've been able to get access to. And I'm happy about that.
Yeah, it certainly widens the net by which you're fishing with, to torture a metaphor. Let's step back a little and get back to some other sort of challenge conversations, which is outside of the workforce ones. What sort of challenges do you see in your role as deputy CIO? It's been almost a year now, I think. No, almost 2 years. Is that right?
Almost 2 years.
What have you learned in the time about the challenges that are coming up at you in the office of CIO?
I think that our biggest challenge is just balancing all of the competing priorities with trying to modernize and maintain legacy environments. As we begin to modernize and go forward, there's so much to be modernized that you've got to, make sure you got the right amount of capacity so that you can continue to deliver on your modernizations, plus upskill your workforce, plus maintain business operations. And so, just juggling those priorities has been somewhat of a challenge, but it's not something that we haven't overcome. We've done a great job at bringing more modern tools, and then just trying to measure in this hybrid work environment has been, somewhat of a challenge. Not that people aren't being more productive; it's just learning a new way to work and starting to measure outcomes and outputs, and not so much how many people do you have in the seat. And so, learning that going forward has been started out to be a challenge, but we overcame that going forward. And now I'm happy to report that, we've adopted this hybrid and remote work scenario, and it's paying dividends for us, at least from an IT perspective. The other challenges that we face is going to be a continuous challenge, and that's in cybersecurity. We're changing our mindset to not believe that we've got cyber solutions, but we're working from a cyber countermeasure perspective. Because a solution sort of suggests that you've solved a problem, and the problem with cyber, we don't believe will ever be solved. As long as we're in the cyberspace, there's always going to be a threat, and we need to continue to evolve to solve those threats.
Well, building off that, how have you been ameliorating those threats and sort of putting up the ramparts against them? Because I know, it is a constant thing.
Well, the White House executive order on cybersecurity kind of outlined the strategy for which agencies should be moving toward. And so, we've adopted a zero trust architecture to go forward. So we submitted dollars as a TMF proposal to begin our zero trust acquisition, or zero trust strategy building rather. And, that's paid dividends to us. And now we're also, rolling out or finalizing all of our multi-factor authentication programs across all of our OPM enterprises. So that's also doing well too. So we're continuously building up our cyber posture and our cyber muscle to make sure that we're securing the data that we need successfully.
Yeah, it's definitely a constant thing. So I asked about challenges. What about successes? What have you seen in your couple of years now at OPM that you've found to be really successful in the office of CIO?
I think the thing that we've been able to staff up and ramp up with a solid team, that's been a huge success. We've been able to, as I said before, bring in early career talent. That's been a huge success. We've been able to modernize our productivity tools. That's been a huge success. We delivered on a portion of a major initiative in our postal services health benefit program with our launch of Carrier Connect. We've got great partnerships with our retirement services colleagues. And, as a result of those partnerships, the backlog in retirement services has been down, the lowest that it's been in the last 6 years. So kudos and credit to My colleagues over in retirement services, they're doing a phenomenal job. And we're going to continue those partnerships so we can continue to bring those things down and harden those successes going forward.
I know in my previous life, the retirement planning side of things and the retirement processing is always at the top of mind for the Office of Personnel Management. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to go over?
Well, I think it's important that people remember that, change only happens when change happens. And that although change may be slow, we can still move the needle, even if just a little bit. And so I think we've got to focus on modernization from what I would consider to be a 4-pillar perspective: people, process, technology, and learning. And what often gets, overlooked is the learning. And so what we've been focused on head over heels is managing the cultural change and adoption of our technology. We want to do technology adoption and not technology deployment. We want to do technology modernization with our customers and not to them. And so managing the culture of change is just as important as managing the technology. We can all turn on new technology and new switches, but if people don't know how to use it, then we haven't really become modern. Our goal is to make sure that whatever we deploy, we build houses that people want to live in. And so that's our mantra. That's the thing that we're focusing on the most, is getting people to use our tools and services in a way that they probably wouldn't before, because we did IT with them and not to them.
I love that the house metaphor, the house that people want to live in, because certainly that is something we can all sort of understand and I think really fits. Thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. That was a really fascinating interview with Melvin Brown. Before we let our listeners go, do you have any last highlights or takeaways that you want to leave them with?
Just that I think OPM has the same kind of issues that everyone else has. Melvin Brown talked to us about modernizing and maintaining legacy environments sort of at the same time. That's something that every person in every CIO's office right now is dealing with. The speed of technology is so fast that trying to balance those two things is deeply important, and OPM is certainly within that framework.
Thank you, Ross. Listeners can tune in next week for a brand new GovCast, but until then, if you like what you heard, make sure you leave a review and a 5-star rating on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Alexander Bolova.
I'm Ross John Fortune.
Thank you for listening. GovCast, along with HealthCast and CyberCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.